Hello, my name is Jake Swanson, and today I'm going to be talking about the same-sex marriage law, both the history of it in Spain and the history of it in the United States, and then sort of contrast between the two. So just a bit about the same-sex marriage law. It is the marriage of two people of the same sex or gender entered into a civil or religious ceremony. It is now available in 28 countries. For Spain, it was legalized July 3rd of 2005, and this would make Spain the third country in the world to do so in legalizing same-sex marriage. Um, Although 66% of the people voted for it, the law was very challenged by the traditional Roman Catholics that had been alive during the Francoist regime. And then the US followed after by legalizing same-sex marriage on June 16th of 2015. So the Spanish youth at this time were very progressive people. They were very expressive with their sexuality. They were very open people. They were inspired by the hippie movement that had happened years earlier, and that's where they get these ideas of experimentation with sex and drugs and freedom and openness and all of that. And they were able to do this as they were not alive during the Franco regime, or they were not heavily affected by Franco as they were very young when he died. So their ideas are not very deeply ingrained within them. Um, and therefore, they're also not very religious people. And as I said, they're focused on freedom, so their main idea is do what you want. Well, those were the characteristics of the Spanish youth during the time. The general culture in Spain was a lot different. As I mentioned, the Spanish youth were not as heavily affected by Franco. However, those that had grown up during his regime didn't really know any other way. And some of these people still believed in this way, even though this was 30 years later after his death. Uh, the people that grew up during this time were traditional Roman Catholics. They did not like gay marriage or gay people at all, as this went against their religion. They were used to very serious traditional marriages. Marriages would be voided if they were not validated by the church. And some other characteristics of this Francoist regime. It was very patriarchal. People were uptight, militaristic, and had a heavy focus on being very masculine. As you can imagine, with ideas on such opposite ends of the spectrum, the Spanish youth and the older generations would eventually end up butting heads about this idea. One of the main ideas was same-sex marriage and whether it should be legal or not. And so this older generation was not as open to new ideas, as this Francoist culture was deeply ingrained in them. They do not want to stray far away. And so, as you can imagine, being gay in general goes against their traditional Catholic ideas. So they're not going to be very accepting of the idea in general. Add on to the fact that it would be an untraditional marriage. It would not be able to be validated by the church, which is something that was very special to them. And so there is just a large contrast in ideas where the youth are focused on freedom and doing what you want versus the older generation, which has a large emphasis on tradition and holding up the values that they had. And one of the values that they had was patriarchy and masculinity. And being gay goes against both of these things in the utmost sense. Today in Spain, people are much more relaxed and accustomed to the idea. As the Spanish youth were able to grow and normalize the concept of same-sex marriage, people began becoming accustomed to it, just as the older generation had become accustomed to the Francoist ideas. And today there are even gay towns in Spain. For example, in Barcelona, there is Gaiexemple, which, excuse me for my pronunciation, but this quite literally translates to gay extension, and it is considered the gay quarter for Barcelona. And there are lots of restaurants, discos, and things like that being opened up. Another example of this is the Chueca Street in Madrid. And this is sort of the same concept where a lot of gay people tended to reside there, and eventually the culture just kept building up, and they became hotspots for gay people to live in. And the focus in these areas is art and freedom, which are two of the ideas that were emphasized with the Spanish youth. So, although the hippie movement technically started in the US, the Spanish hippie movement leaked over and legitimized the hippie movement in the US. And this was largely focused in San Francisco. However, today there are many towns and areas throughout the US that are seen as gay areas. And so this US hippie movement had the same ideology as the Spanish hippie movement, which was focused on things such as freedom, doing what you want, peace, all of those ideas. And so as this grew, it really led to an openness in ideas for the US as well. And the US would eventually follow Spain in legalizing same sex marriage 10 years later. So, as mentioned, as the youth in the world were able to grow up and normalize the idea of same sex marriage, people have become more accustomed to it. And so I would say that today, same sex couples, and especially the marriage of same sex couples, don't stick out at all and are seen as very normal. People are very accepting of these ideas. And gay people have full rights. They're allowed to be married. They're not treated as second class citizens whatsoever. There are also now anti hate crime laws that are put in place to protect these people and protect discrimination against them. And I believe that legalizing same sex marriage just sort of serves as a benchmark for openness and progressiveness and what we can do as a society. And I believe that that's very important because things are constantly changing. We need to be able to adapt to society and make sure that everyone else in society is able to feel comfortable so that we can be as happy as possible. Lastly, these are my sources. That's all I have to talk about today.